Have you ever heard of a single event so shocking it completely shatters a nation's morale? Today, we redive into one of history's most stunning reversals of fortuna moment. When the seemingly Imperial Japanese Navy was dealt a blow so severe, it left an entire country in a state of disbelief. This is the story of the Battle of Midway and the shocking loss of not one, not two, but four of Japan's most powerful aircraft carriers. Just 6 months before, Japan was riding a wave of unprecedented victory. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor had crippled the American Pacific Fleet, and their forces were sweeping across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. The rising sun flew over vast new territories, from the Philippines to Singapore, from the Dutch East Indies to remote Pacific islands. To the Japanese public, their navy was invincible. Their pilots were samurai of the skies, and their destiny to rule Asia seemed assured. Central to this string of victories was the Kidobuto, the mobile strike force of the Imperial Japanese Navy. At its heart were four legendary fleet carriers: the Akagi, the Kaga, the Soryu, and the Hiryu. These weren't just ships, they were national symbols of power and technological prowess. Akagi and Kaga were veterans, converted from battleships and battlecruisers, representing the old guard's strength. Soryu and Hiryu were newer, faster, purpose-built carriers, embodying the modern, lethal edge of the fleet. Together, they had spearheaded the attack on Pearl Harbor. They had sunk British warships, raided the Indian Ocean, and projected Japanese power across half the globe. To the Japanese people, these four ships were the very embodiment of victory. So, what happened? In early June 1942, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor, set a massive trap. His plan was to lure the remnants of the American fleet to Midway Atoll, a tiny but strategic outpost northwest of Hawaii. Once there, he would crush them with overwhelming force, effectively ending the naval war in the Pacific. The plan was intricate, involving multiple fleets spread across hundreds of miles of ocean, with the four carriers of the WWII as the hammer that would strike the final blow. From the Japanese perspective, it was a foolproof plan. They had more ships, more experienced pilots, and a string of victories that had bred a dangerous sense of overconfidence. They believed the American carriers were still licking their wounds, possibly thousands of miles away. They were wrong. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, American codebreakers had cracked their naval codes. Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, knew exactly where and when the Japanese would strike. He knew Midway was the target, and he knew the Japanese believed they had the element of surprise. Instead of waiting to be ambushed, Nimitz set a counter-trap, sending his only available carriers, the Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet, to lie in wait for the Japanese fleet. On the morning of June 4th, the battle began. Japanese planes struck Midway Atoll as planned, but the island's defenses were ready. Meanwhile, the Japanese carriers were searching for the American fleet, completely unaware that the Americans already knew their location. The first American attacks came from land-based and carrier-based torpedo bombers. These attacks were heroic, but almost suicidal. Flying low and slow, they were easy targets for Japanese Zero fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Squadron after squadron was wiped out, with almost no hits on the Japanese ships. From the bridge of the Akagi, it must have seemed like another easy victory. The American attacks were failing miserably, but these doomed torpedo squadrons did something critically important. They pulled the Japanese fighter patrols down to sea level, leaving the skies above the carriers exposed. And just as the Japanese were rearming their planes for a second strike, a new wave of American planes appeared high above. These were the dauntless dive bombers from the Enterprise in Yorktown, in what is often called the most crucial 5 minutes of the Pacific War. American dive bombers screamed down from the heavens. The Japanese carriers, their decks packed with fully fueled and armed aircraft, were perfect targets. Bombs slammed into the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, turning their flight decks into scenes of unimaginable chaos. Explosions ripped through the ships as bombs, torpedoes, and aviation fuel ignited in a chain reaction. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's mightiest carriers were transformed into blazing, helpless inferno. The last remaining carrier, the Hiryu, fought back bravely. Her planes launched and found the American carrier Yorktown, hitting it so severely that it was eventually lost. But the Hiru's survival was short-lived. Later that day, American planes found it too. More bombs rained down, and by the next morning, the last of the 4 great carriers was also sinking beneath the waves. In a single day, the core of Japan's naval aviation strength had been utterly annihilated. Back in Japan, the news was met with complete and utter silence. The government and military, who had 4 months been feeding the public a steady diet of victory headlines, could not admit the scale of this disaster. The battle was initially reported as a great victory. They claimed to have sunk American carriers and secured Midway. But as time went on, the truth began to leak out. Survivors from the sunken ships were quarantined, forbidden from speaking about what they had seen. Families waited for letters from their loved ones that would never arrive. The psychological impact, once the reality of the loss settled in, was devastating. How could the invincible Kido Butai be defeated? How could 4 carriers, the pride of the nation, be lost in a single day? For the Japanese leadership, it was a strategic catastrophe from which they would never recover. They lost not only their 4 best carriers, but also over 100 of their most experienced and irreplaceable pilots. The naval air arm was gutted. The initiative in the Pacific was lost, permanently. For the Japanese people, the shock was profound. The steady stream of victory announcements suddenly dried up. While the war would drag on for 3 more brutal years, the Battle of Midway was the turning point. It marked the end of Japanese expansion and the beginning of a long, painful retreat. The loss of the Akagi, Kagasoryu, and Hiryu was more than just a military defeat. It was a deep psychological wound that signaled the beginning of the end. It was the moment when the dream of empire began to unravel, all in the space of a single, catastrophic day at sea. This story is a powerful reminder of how quickly the fortunes of war can turn, and how overconfidence can lead to ruin. The shock felt by the Japanese people wasn't just about losing ships. It was about losing a core part of their national identity and the belief in their own destiny. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as I do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. See you in the next video.